Welcome to the Into the Wilderness podcast. This week we are recording this part of the podcast all the way from Norway. We're standing on the edge of a fjord. We've been here for 10, 11 days, I don't know, I've lost count now. It's been awesome, and it's part of a new project that we're doing called 62 Degrees North.
If you haven't seen it, check it out.
Yeah.
It's all on Facebook, you can't miss it really.
We'll be bringing you far more of that towards the end of this year in terms of videos, so we'll talk about that in a couple of weeks' time. This week it's all about a very serious topic, which is chronic wasting disease, and it's actually quite an interesting thing that we've ended up in Norway because one of our guests is from Norway, and it is the center of the discussion because there have been a number of cases of chronic wasting disease in Norway recently, and it is the catalyst for doing this podcast. We also have another guest from Germany, and I have a feeling that this is going to be one that's probably going to inform you more than many of the other podcasts we've done, because it's not only an incredibly serious topic, it's also fairly complicated. But
it's a lot to take in.
There's a lot to take in,
but you can always go back and listen again. That's the beauty of the podcast, and it is something that, because it's so serious, people should be sharing it.
Yeah, definitely. This is another one of those which you really need to spread the word amongst people who aren't hunters, but especially people who are hunters who travel, because there is a really high potential, if you travel like we are here in Norway right now, that you could end up bringing it back to whatever country you're from. So have a listen, understand the severity of it, and enjoy it, and try and take something away from it.
We have prizes to give away. We haven't forgotten about it. With us being away, it's quite complicated doing prizes. We've almost had no internet. So what we're going to do, when we get back in 2 weeks' time on our next podcast, all of the people who entered the competitions, we'll announce them. Yeah, there will be winners. There will be winners.
We do, because we've still got one from 2 weeks before, which was the Caldwell shooting rest.
Yep.
The prize from last time was a solar bank for charging your gear. And there's going to be another prize for this podcast. And if you want to know what the prize for this podcast is, you need to listen to the chronic wasting disease discussion, because we're going to tell you at the end. This podcast, as always, is brought to you by the Scottish Association for Country Sports. They've got a lot of interesting discussion right now on Facebook, especially with regard to salmon and fisheries. So if you're somebody who is interested in that, go and check out their Facebook page, and you'll be able to read the discussions and various other documents that they've shared.
Enjoy the show.
Yes, enjoy the show. Nina, Kristina, thank you very much for joining me on the show today. You've both come on to talk about a very serious topic. But before we get into that, if I could just go to each of you first and just give our listeners a little bit of a rundown of sort of who you are, what you do on a day-to-day basis, building up to your understanding and opinions on chronic wasting disease, so that people can paint a picture of where you're placed sort of in the world. Nina, obviously, I know you fairly well, as well as being a Dr. Nina Krüger. You are also a sporting journalist, so that's a great insight for those people who are also hunters from your point of view. So maybe, Nina, if I could just start with you and then go over to Kristina.
Yes, I'm working as an editor and journalist for 2 German hunting magazines. Initially, I studied biology and have a PhD in molecular biology with main topics of neurobiology and protein biochemistry. So I know a little bit about neurological diseases. So that's why I'm very interested in chronic wasting disease from a biological point of view, and of course from the hunter's point of view.
And Kristina, sorry, carry on, Nina.
No, I'm finished.
Okay, and Kristina, what about yourself? You could just give a sort of similar insight into you.
Yes. I am the Chief Veterinary Officer in Norway, and I work in the Norwegian Food Safety Authority. So we are then the authority that is dealing with the 3 cases actually that we have of CVD in Norway, 1 case in reindeer and 2 cases in moose. So we are working then actively on this now we are running now, started the monitoring program in Norway for then looking into CVD in different cervids. In Norway, that is reindeer, red deer, roe deer, and moose.
I want to dig into that a little bit more to understand the importance of the monitoring programs and what you have seen so far. But if I could go back to you, Nina, and just try and explain in the most basic terms as you can what chronic wasting disease is and where it's come from. We all know, I think most people will know of it in America. Certainly that's where I first heard of it maybe 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. That's where I first heard about it as well, during my studies. And since then, I've been very concerned that it might come to Europe, since it's so easily transmitted between cervids. It's actually a transmissible spongiform encephalopathy, which is similar to the well-known BSE in cattle. It is very unlike other diseases that are transmitted by viruses or bacteria, transmitted by proteins, so-called prions, which are naturally occurring in living cells on the surface of cells of the nervous system, mainly. And they exist in two forms, in a functional form and in a misshaped pathological form. And which is very interesting, or it is very interesting that the misshaped form is forcing the healthy form of the protein in the same non-functional conformation. And since it's very resistant to any kind of degradation, it accumulates within the cells of the nervous tissues, and these cells eventually die and leave lesions, especially in the brain, which is giving the disease or the form of diseases their name, since leaving this sponge-like appearance in the tissue of the brain. And these, as you can imagine, if you have holes in your brain, this is causing all kinds of neurological symptoms that are eventually lethal.
And Kristina, just as a man on the street, someone who's a hunter who's out there and they're looking at animals all the time, visually, what do you see? If an animal has chronic wasting disease, what would you expect to see?
No, it's I think maybe the most important thing that these animals, when they really are sick, the incubation time is very long here. They say about 2 years, but when they're really showing clinical symptoms and are sick, they will not be afraid of humans in the same way as ordinary or healthy animals. So I think that is important, that if you see an animal that is not afraid of you, that is something to consider. And then of course you have these neurological symptoms. They can move around in circles and so on, and of course they get very thin and they look unhealthy. And so of course this is developing then slowly, and as Nina said, they will die in the end. But they're not afraid of people. I think that is a rule that is important to remember for people that are out there in nature. And we tell them that all kind of animals that act naturally, they should then take contact with the authorities in the municipality, and then we will take out those animals and we will test them then for CVD.
And what can you tell me about the cases which have been documented recently in Norway?
Yes, we have 3 animals, and it's 2 cases in, you could say the first was a reindeer in the west part of Norway, and that was found out during they were monitoring the animals, and so they were in a helicopter, and this animal acted naturally. It ran out of the flock and then it lay down, and when they came to the animals, they took down the helicopter, and when they came to the animal, it was dead. So it was taken out then to be tested, and we test all these kind of animals. We have been testing them for chronic wasting disease for many years. So the other, so that was in the west of Norway. That was the first case, and then we have 2 cases in moose in another area, the same area, and that was fallen stock. One animal, sick animal, was reported from somebody saw it out in the woods. And the second animal was already dead, lying in a river, so it was also sampled. And But something that's rather interesting is that we, of course, the Veterinary Institute in Oslo, the Norwegian Veterinary Institute, they have established a good cooperation with the reference laboratory in Canada, the reference laboratory for CVD in the world. So one of their researchers was over there now in the summer holidays and had with her samples of these 3 animals. And it seems like it is not the same type of CVD on the reindeer and on the moose, which is quite interesting, of course. The reindeer looks more like a classical CVD, but the moose is a bit different. So it might be another type. That, of course, is something that we will look into, but because it takes time to kind of look into that question about typing. So you need to use mice and so on in the laboratory to do that. But it seems not to be quite the same type in the Western Norway, in the reindeer, and in the moose in the eastern part of the country. And of course, there's no contact also between animals in the west and the east. So that explains that it was a bit difficult for us to understand how it could be transmitted from the west of the country to the eastern part. But now it seems it's 2 different types.
Nina, do we know how it first arrived in Europe? Was it something that's come over from America, or is this still pretty much unknown?
It's pretty much unknown. Nobody really knows how it came over. And actually, Kristina, is any of the 2 types resembling one of the US types of CVD?
No, as I understand from the Canadian researchers, they only say that the reindeer type is more or less what they find in North America, but the other one is a bit different. But of course, that is based on physiology of the brain, then of Western blot. So, and that's difficult to it's not exact information in those 2 way of looking into this prion disease. So you have to do this research with mice to be really sure. So that will take some time.
Yeah.
But if the listeners are interested in more information, the Norwegian Scientific Committee for Food Safety, they made a risk assessment, which is out on the web, on their website, and then they have gone through the case, the 3 cases that we have now, and they also made some, I would say, speculations on how this could happen. I mean, how we could find this in Europe. And I think they have some theories that, of course, we have to look into further when we have monitored and see how many animals we will find. But one of them, of course, is that it could be a possibility that it is coming from the North America in some way, which is very difficult for us to understand because we haven't imported any live animals from America or Canada ever into Norway. Then, of course, could be spontaneous. This is not ordinary for CVD. You have some atypical type, for example, in cattle, but I mean, somewhere it has to start. So that is also one possibility. So I think we will know more about this when we have, as I said, run our screening program. Also, when they have analyzed more these 2 types that we find in the reindeer and the 2 moose.
I'll find that link and I'll stick it up on the description for this podcast for our listeners to go and have a look.
There's a lot of information there about wildlife, the wild population of deer on moose and so on in Norway. And they made quite a lot of, also looked into all the information from North America.
Yeah, I have to really compliment the Norwegian authorities. They really put very quickly a lot of effort into informing people. Very unlike the EU and other European hunting associations, for example, which took them quite a while to put something out.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen a little bit here from the British Deer Society. I saw that they released a statement maybe 6 months ago. It pretty much coincided with the cases in Norway. But I would say that an awareness and certainly a knowledge of chronic wasting disease and, well, what it is, which hence the reason why we're having this conversation, but how it can be spotted and what people have to do, I'd say is pretty poor in the UK. And as you've just said, Nina, I know across most of Europe that's probably true as well. And I wanted to ask you, in terms of species, What species are we looking at here? What is the species that it can be transmitted to? Are there some species that can be carriers but who are not, which are not affected?
Well, there's not that much known so far, since it's only been occurring in the US until recently, where mainly mule deer and white-tailed deer were affected, and to a certain degree red deer, elk, and moose were affected. We don't really know which of the European deer species are susceptible and which are not. We know now that reindeer apparently can get it, but we don't know anything really about roe deer, for example, in the wild, for fallow deer, for muntjac, or whatever deer that we have in the sicker deer in Europe, if they are susceptible in the wild or just in captive environments. We don't really know.
And what are you doing, or what are they doing in Germany about making sure that they're aware if they've got any cases? Is there something in place?
Well, there was a monitoring program in place from 2003 or 6, I think, until 2006 until 2010, where European-wide about 13,000 brain samples of deer were tested, and but this monitoring program ended in 2010 because the EU decided that the risk was very low and didn't justify the effort. Now they are doing a new risk assessment and will decide then what to do and how to monitor again. I think in the moment it's very poor and very slow going, monitoring wise.
And what about yourself, Kristina? How does the monitoring take place? I know you described a little bit of it there, where you're using helicopters to look for animals. But what is the current plan in Norway for monitoring the animals that you have there?
Oh, we have made a program for monitoring that is actually started the 20th of August, because then the hunting season for wild reindeer starts, and it will continue then out to the end of December. And then we will test, the aim of our program is to test 15,000 animals, most of them wild animals. We will also test some farmed reindeer. That is an industry in Norway, farmed reindeer. So we will test also farmed reindeer in the areas close to where we had positive reindeer and positive moose. And then we will also continue, that might be next year or the end of the year, then continue to Finnmark, the north of Norway, where we have the big population of farmed reindeer. But we will screen then for the kind of deer we have in Norway, which is, of course, reindeer, wild reindeer. We have about 25,000 wild reindeers. And then we have moose, which is quite a big population, maybe 150,000 animals. We hunt about 32,000 animals every year in moose. And then red deer, which is also a big population. We hunt about 36,000 red deers every year. And then we will also test raw deer, which is also a quite big population. And then we also will go into the farms where we have deer. We have quite a few small farms with red deer mostly. Some fallow deer in those farms, but fallow deer we have very few in the wild. Some have escaped from the farms, but that's very small population. So we will test all the kind of deers or cervids that we have in Norway will be tested in this year. So we say about 15,000 animals. And then, of course, it's very important to also focus on fallen stock. Also sick animals that are observed. Of course, there are more observation during the hunting season, because then the hunters are out in the field. But also then animals that are part of the traffic accidents. Those animals will also be tested. So the aim is to test about 5,000 fallen stock of moose, red deer, and raw deer on a yearly basis then, because that's where you would probably have the best chances to find positive animals. So, but we will run a big program this year to see if we can find the disease in other areas, and not least important, the most important maybe is to see in those areas where we have found the disease, do we find more animals? Also, how big is the problem? Is it single animals, or do we have some hotspots like they have in North America, where you have areas where it's up to 30% of the animals that test positive? So it's important for us to get the overview, and then we have to decide what to do with this when we have this overview.
So I assume then that you're working quite closely with your hunting associations and the hunters to provide the samples. Would that be right?
Yes, and with the environmental authorities, they have excellent contacts with the hunters. So the hunters are very positive to join this program, to send in samples, and then they will get answer on the samples. We hope 2 to 4 days. If we're able to do that, the veterinary institutes are doing all the analyzing, and then positive animals should not be eaten. It should not go to human consumption. So that is also something that we have made quite clear. So those animals should not be eaten, and we have to take care of the rest of the animal that the hunters have to discard it in a proper manner.
Nina, I'm not sure who's best placed to answer this, but what is the risk to humans?
Well, nobody knows, actually. There's no proven case where CVD has been transmitted to humans, but it took them quite a while to confirm that for BSE as well. So I wouldn't be too sure, and I think it is absolutely right to not consume any animals that are tested positive for CVD or that you suspect to have CVD. Absolutely. But in the moment, it's not really clear how big the risk is. It doesn't look like there's a big risk, but nobody really knows. I wouldn't eat it, to be honest.
Sorry,
I think
Krüger,
that the risk assessment that was done is, they say, as Nina says, that the risk, if it's a risk, it's very small, but you cannot exclude it. You cannot say 100% for sure it's no risk. So that's why we have this more cautious attitude towards the positive animals, that they should not be eaten.
It's known for BSE, for example, that there are specific human genetic variants that are more susceptible to BSE than others. So to develop Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease later on. So nobody knows how or if there are any genetic variants in humans that might favor transmission or not.
Oh, that's interesting.
You have the same in both in cattle and sheep, and also in deer, probably, that some animals will easier get the disease than others. So that's something that we want to look into, to do analysis on the different animals to see if there could be something in the genetics that could explain, or there be similarities then on animals that are positive. So we would like to look into that. So we are working on the Veterinary Institute to have a research program on that, to look into that also.
And just to explain the gravity of this disease, because it's we haven't made it clear yet just how devastating this could be if it ran away. I mean, what can you compare this to, and what would Europe and our deer populations and the UK even, which is a captive population because we're an island, look like if this really started to run and go from species to species and animal to animal?
Well, that would be something very, very worrying. In the US, in wild populations, as Kristina already said, it can reach up to 30% prevalence, and in captive herds, it is known that almost 100% could develop CVD. So with a very high deer population densities in some areas in Europe, this is very much concerning, actually, and it's very easy transmitted between individuals, since it's transmitted by saliva, by urine, by feces, and can stay infective in the soil for a very long time. Areas can get contaminated for years, maybe even decades. We don't know. It could be a major problem. If you imagine you have 30% infected in a population, this is almost every third animal.
Well, I agree with Nina. It is quite serious if we have many animals or groups of animals that develop this disease, because it is so contagious. If you compare it with the other prion diseases, they are not so contagious as CVD. So that is, of course, for Norway, with the big population of different kind of deers and moose and reindeer and so on, and that would be very serious. So that's why we would like to have this good overview to start with, to see how we could on a good scientifically basis then decide what we can do about it.
And I think it's very, very important that we raise awareness and that hunters realize that they have to very closely cooperate with authorities, with researchers that are working on this problem, and report any case that might be suspicious to them.
And so given that there's monitoring going on, certainly in Norway, and that if cases come to light, obviously it'll be, well, people should report that to the authorities. What is the contingency plan? I suppose Norway is a good place because you seem to be further ahead than anybody else in terms of having a grasp on the disease. So what is the contingency plan to stop it spreading once you've located where it is?
Yes, that is. We already made some what do you call it, arrangements, or we made a regulation to have some what do you call action on what you should not do. So we have regulated about you're not allowed to feed deers, moose, and so on. Because that happens in Norway like in many other countries, and you're not allowed then to use deer urine in the hunting. There is something they use it for during hunting, so that is forbidden. And also then these lick stones with salt that you place out for the animals, that's forbidden. And people are not allowed to move animals from one district to another. Of course, the wild animals, they will go where they want, but especially when we talk about farmed reindeer, then you're not allowed to move it from, you have to ask for permission to move animals, and it's not allowed to move from the south of the country to the north of the country. And then, of course, we also have this that you should report. Should report sick animals then to the authorities. So this is a regulation that we made. It will be a regulation that's there until we have done the monitoring, and then we see if we have to change something. And of course, we don't export meat from wild cervids and also from the farmed reindeer at the moment because of this disease. So, but of course, I think it's we have to look into that. If we have hotspots, what can we do? That is something that we have not discussed in detail yet. What we have to see on results. But I mean, we in Norway we have been fighting a lot of animal diseases that other countries don't fight at all, and we have done it successfully. So we will have an open mind to see, is it possible, and what can we do to erase the problem if we have hotspots like that. So that is something that we have to consider when we know how many animals that have this disease.
Nina, what would you like to see in place in Germany or the other European countries in terms of a contingency plan? Because it does feel very much to me from the conversations I've had with other people and sort of reinforced by this conversation that we're having now, that it doesn't feel like people are ready if it does come about that suddenly it's there in their own countries.
No, people are not ready. The hunters are not ready. They're not well informed yet. Authorities are not ready. There is no emergency or action plan in Germany or the EU in the moment. Of course, every measure where deer concentrate, like on feeding, salt licks, watering places, are very, very difficult. And of course, if we see a spread to other countries, we must really think about banning any of these, of course. But awareness in the moment for traveling hunters, for example, is really important, so that there's no risk that they bring it with whatever to their countries. This is most important in the moment.
Excuse me. I think I can mention also that EFSA, they will also make a risk assessment. The Commission asked for a from EFSA in Parma, and there will be 2 Norwegian, one from Veterinary Institute and one is a specialist on wild deer population, moose and so on. 2 participants in the panel from Norway that is working on the cases we have here now. They will be a part of that panel. So I suppose that will also what EU will decide how they want to deal with this challenge. And I think that one of them, of course, is they would like to also do some more monitoring. And of course, fallen stock is very important to check, especially. We, of course, have also good cooperation with Sweden and Finland, which are our neighbor countries, especially Sweden. I think the moose population in Norway and Sweden, that's more or less the same population. They will go over the border back and forth quite often during a season. So we are in contact with them, and I think also Sweden is planning to run monitoring on their moose and farmed reindeer, which is on the borderline, on the border. So they will also do some work on that, I'm quite sure. And they also have sent out a message they want risk animals on fallen stock to be sent in for testing.
That would be actually something that hopefully will be implemented in Germany or other European countries as well. And I think it's important that we might establish some institutions like the reference lab in Canada and send or learn the same expertise that they have there, so that we don't have to final confirmation always send samples over. Because I think it took quite a while until the cases in Norway were confirmed to be really the same. Or
yes, that's
not
right.
The same case, yeah.
We used Weybridge, which is the reference laboratory for BSE, the cattle. Yes, and they couldn't say exactly, but they said they thought that was what it is. But it takes some week to have a confirmation.
Yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
That's
so
right.
It would be good to have a European reference lab. For confirmation.
It sounds to me like it's something that you definitely want to get on top of as soon as you're aware that it's there. So breaking down that time frame that it takes to confirm it could be the difference between getting on top of it and not.
Yes, absolutely.
As a traveling hunter, in fact, I'm a good example because I'm myself and my brother, who can't be here today, we're traveling to Norway just in a matter of weeks. Actually, when driving through Europe to go and hunt in Norway. What does a traveling hunter need to keep in mind? What can they do to make sure that they're not going to be the cause of spreading this, even if they don't even know that it's in their country? But I suppose that's the point.
Yes. We have on our website, there's also an English version, so there it will be translated, the information that we give to the Norwegian hunters. So that can be... But we have not made any special precautions yet, I think, with, of course, ordinary precautions like clean clothes and shoes and so on. But our main focus at the moment is to get in samples from the hunters and also to get information about sick animals. That is the first. So of course we have to look into this after we know the results from the monitoring program to see if we have to go further in those recommendations to the hunters. But if I would say that you should look on our website, and then you will see there's information also in English for hunters.
So what they recommend in the US, for example, for traveling hunters is to not bringing back any clothes that been contaminated with blood, tissue, stuff like that. Clean shoes in the country itself. Don't bring back mud, soil or anything. Don't bring back non-prepared trophies. So trophies that were still brain or other muscle tissue or whatever is still attached to. These are the precautions that are taken that they recommend in the US.
But that's something that I will also something that we also could put on our website. So I will inform the people working on communication here with.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's brilliant. We've
Sounds like good advice.
More than
Yes.
just informing our listeners, we've now put forward part of a solution into Europe. That's excellent.
Right.
No, I think that there's so much information there, and I hope that the people listening understand just the importance and the potential devastation that a disease like this could cause. We're going to get on someone from the UK, from the British Deer Society, to talk about it from our end here and what we are actually doing in the UK. I'm a little bit. I know that there is a committee in place and that they are in the process of making plans, but I'm unsure exactly how far they have got there just now. But I'm sure that they'll be liaising with our European counterparts, and especially Norway, who are much farther ahead than everybody else.
No, probably not. Well, we really have to understand what a major threat this is, not only to wild deer populations, but for the whole hunting and deer farming industry. How devastating it really can get. Because if we have same implementations like in some states in the US where they're really severely thinning out deer populations and try to reduce it unbelievably, then this is really worrying.
So is that what they're currently doing in America in order to tackle it? They're thinning the populations down so that there's less chance of transmission between animals?
Yes, exactly. And especially in hotspot regions, they try to get rid of the population in total to stop the disease from spreading into other states and counties.
So it could take generations of animals to bring it back to the same density and populations as before the disease. So it truly could be absolutely devastating for the species, and the spin-off of that, the people who enjoy hunting it. And then I suppose another spin-off of that is all the other benefits that you get from, especially in America, the incomes from people going to places to hunt. And there's a whole catalogue of things which could have a bit of a domino effect.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially in the US, a lot of people rely on venison. Their main meat consumption is coming from venison. And we have a huge venison market in Europe as well. And you can imagine what would happen if people think they can get mad deer disease from venison. That would be dramatic. Even though the risk is assessed to be low, you know how newspapers and people react.
Yeah.
I think we have to remember, and I'm sure that you in the UK remember the
PSC.
mad cow disease.
Yeah.
So all the discussions and around that topic, and that was quite devastating, I think, for people's trust in the authorities, the way it was handled.
Mm-hmm.
That is, of course, something that I at least remember very well, and we have that in mind when we are dealing with the CVD here in Norway.
Yeah, no, I remember, I was quite young at the time, but I still remember the driving down the motorway and going through all the disinfecting basins and seeing piles of cows on fire in pits. And yeah, that wasn't that long ago, and that might actually focus the mind of people listening to this. We're talking on the same scale as that, but it just happens to be more wild populations that we're talking about here than domestic. Certainly,
which is a lot more difficult to control.
Yeah.
Because the BSE problem was relatively easy to control in the end by eliminating the feeding with bone meal and by testing every slaughtered animal. It is very, very difficult to get a infected wild population under control. Because you can't just eliminate the infectious agent. They are infecting each other with saliva or urine or whatever. That is very, very difficult to eliminate.
I quite agree. But also the BSE, the mad cow disease, was a very expensive exercise for the authorities, all the checking and so on, to develop the trust that was lost during this. So, but of course that was possible to control. This is much more difficult if you really have a infection going on in the area or a hotspot, then it's much more difficult to control than in a cattle population.
I was just thinking, well, you were talking about venison there and the potential impact on venison sales, and I know for a fact that in the UK, where there have been no cases reported, but we export a lot of venison during the rut because we don't particularly like eating venison from that period of time because it's all primarily coming from stags in the middle of the rut, and then most of that goes to Europe actually. And I'm just I'm just thinking to myself now whether this is so serious that should that be stopped this year until we know, even from countries that have no cases reported.
Oh, but that is absolutely. I mean, all the beef from UK was stopped during the mad cow, so that was also. So it's possible. It's possible. That could be a problem. Of course, the EU today import of venison then from North America, Canada. Then they all animals have to be tested. All single animals have to be tested before they are allowed to export them to the EU. Today, that is.
And then you have to keep in mind for testing, they need samples of nervous tissue. I think they still need samples of the brain to confirm. Kristina, am I right?
Yes, I think today it's. I've seen that there are some reports about testing live animals. I see that.
Okay.
Yes, but that is, I think, just early days for that. But they are testing out methods to do it also on live animals. But today it's after the animals is slaughtered that you have to do the testing.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Which could be a concern for people that, especially when they go hunting during the rut, it's mainly trophy hunting.
Yeah.
And which is a huge additional income, I think. And if you get trouble with trophy hunting because you have to provide the heads or brain samples, and I'm quite sure that you won't be allowed to take the samples yourself. You have to probably send in the head or something like that. Then this could get really difficult as well. All things that we have to keep in mind.
Yeah, as an implication I hadn't actually even thought of. But yeah, a good point. I don't know if it's still the case, but I know that, and I'm going to try and find out soon, but I know that we used to import yearly reindeer from Norway for our festive period, during Christmas time, because there's reindeer all up and down the country for Santa Claus. I would imagine that they're going to stop that this year, but I'll have to check on that, because that seems to me like a very obvious way to transmit it or bring it here, and a danger which I think we could do without.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
what you import when you import reindeer from Norway, that is farmed reindeers from the north of Norway. But the export of reindeer meat from Norway is very limited. I looked at the export statistics the last years, and it's very limited. So, but that is, as I said, farmed reindeer, and 75% from the farmed reindeers in Norway, they are in the north of the country. But they will also be a part of the monitoring program.
Okay. So no, that brings me some comfort. I will ask the question. I know that the British Deer Society here, I think that was something that they brought up, and I think they were going to try and, despite the fact that they might be monitored, I think they were going to try and stop that this year, just to try and minimize all risks.
The wild reindeer, there's not any export of meat from wild reindeer that's eaten in Norway. That's not that many animals hunted. So it's the farmed reindeers that are exported if they're in it. But the export, as I said, is very small.
Well, I think that everyone listening should have a fairly good grasp of this, and at the very least be intrigued to go and look into it more. And I really do urge everybody, your hunters and non-hunters alike, just to learn about the disease and further the implications of it, and the potential for it to cause just mass devastation across a country, which something I think even a lot of governments haven't quite grasped just yet. So I will stick up all the links to the websites that you've mentioned, and encourage people to go and read through those. And certainly as things come out in the coming months, and as the process of monitoring goes on, and if any more cases come out, we'll be sure to pass on that information so people can keep the most up to date. But thank you very much for both of your time. I'm really pleased that we managed to get you both on today. I know for a fact that there will be a lot of information in there that people didn't know. So this is a really, really good starting point for people to be aware of the disease.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nina.
Thank you very much,
Kristina.
Thank you.
Okay, perfect.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye now.
Well, thank you very much for listening to this week's show. Join us again in 2 weeks' time, where we're going to bring you some guests from Norway.
We are.
That's the plan.
We haven't recorded it yet, but we will be bringing you some guests
from Norway. This week's prize is
a Surefire LED torch. We will put up, I do have it in my rucksack, so we're going to take some pictures of it all the way. I don't know why I brought it all the way to Norway, but I do. So we're going to go and put some pictures up on Facebook, so you can see what it looks like and all the spec. We gave away a Surefire torch a few months ago now, and I know that the person that won it was absolutely delighted with it. So yes, we've got another one to give away.
How you win this? You got to leave us a review on iTunes or Stitcher. So that's Apple or Android. Leave a review, and we're going to pick one from the most recent reviews, as in from this date until the competition closes. Leave a review, and then that's how you win.
So if you want to win a really awesome Surefire torch, just leave us a review. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, nice and easy. Well, thank you very much for listening to the show. We'll see you again in 2 weeks' time, when we won't be in Norway. We'll be done by then.
We'll actually be home after a month.
We'll be home after a month. But please check out our Facebook page. Also, any more information, www.thepacebrothers.com. You can download this iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, YouTube, you name it, you can do it. Spread the word.
It's on TuneIn Radio.
TuneIn Radio, it's there. Spread the word.
Also check out our Instagram account. There's a lot of cool pictures we're putting up there.
Yeah, so if you like Instagram, we're putting up stuff all the time, as well as the Facebook pages. So check out Pace Brothers Into the Wilderness, the podcast page, and Instagram. There's loads of them. But
Pace_brothers, right?
But it's all on the pacebrothers.com. You can't go wrong.
And just lastly, we mentioned it maybe 2 weeks ago. We have just started running wilderness hunts. And if you want to know a little bit more about wilderness hunts, we're doing 2 of them this year. This season, one this year and one the start of 2017. Go to thepacebrothers.com and you will find a tab for wilderness hunts. You'll be able to read all about it. And we finally have all the details for that. So everybody who's already inquired and wants to come and experience hunting the way that we do it, we will be emailing you back as soon as we get a second with all of the details for the hunt, and we'll also get it up on the website. So go check it out. If you're interested, ping us an email, and we're going to send out the information to everybody who has expressed an interest.
Yep.
This podcast is supported by the Scottish Association for Country Sports. We hope you enjoyed it, and we will speak to you again in 2 weeks' time.
2 weeks' time. Thank you.